Um, as I was driving in here this morning, the Lord was really just speaking to me about each one of you and how you are each like a tree. You know, that we are each like a tree, and all the trees are different. And I think one of the things about this time of year is that they're all bare. You know, like you can see the exact structure of the tree. You can see where it has a damaged branch. You can see where it seems like it's missing something. You can see where it's full. And that's what God really does with each one of us. He sees us like that. Like he sees us bare. You know, he sees us without all the leaves. And you know, we see each other like those trees with the full leaves on. You know, the way I see you this morning, you know, yeah, you have your jewelry on or a scarf or whatever. You're wearing glasses. Like, I see your features, but the Lord sees our hearts. And I was thinking about, you know, just what a tree is and how trees give life and they carry oxygen, and how just this, like, little one tiny seed that gets planted in the ground can grow, you know, over time into this massive, large tree. And isn't that true for each one of us, that, you know, it's these seeds that are deposited inside of us by the Lord that grow and mature into these really amazing, beautiful things that he does with our lives. And that's kind of the place where I want to start today. Like, I don't want you to even think about the fact that this book is called Esther. Like, today, let's just forget that. Let's just forget that Esther's even coming. Let's just read chapter 1 for what it is. And let's not think about what's going to happen after. You know, like, I think for me, when I read through the word, because I already know the end of the story, like, it's not like it's, you know, Esther's not a new thing to me. I already know what's coming. Like, I know the beauty that's going to come at the end. But these aren't just stories, you know, and they were lives that were lived out. And for the people who played a role in each one of these things, they didn't know what was going to happen. They didn't know what was coming next. They didn't know, like, you know, when chapter 1 begins, it's not like the Jews already know what's coming down the road for them and that they need somebody who's going to save their nation. They don't know any of that stuff. And I just want us to forget that this morning, too, because I really feel like the Lord wants to specifically say something to each one of us about our lives and about the way we see our lives. And to be able to catch that, we have to just look at this for what it is. So this morning, we're going to take some time to just talk about the background, talk about, you know, the setting, talk about the king. Like, I really want us to focus on the king today, because I think if we're going to appreciate how monumental it all was when, you know, Esther went before him and all the things that transpired later on in this book, we have to get how things looked at this time period. But before I do that, I do want to make sure that the video is rolling. So hold on just a second. Okay, so it says, now it took place in the days of Ahasuerus that he reigned from India to Ethiopia over 127 provinces. And I would just encourage you that if you haven't looked at a map to see what that means exactly, look in your Bible, look online. It was a huge, huge amount of area. And to think, you know, that he was the ruler over all of this when there weren't tanks, you know, and like airplanes and stuff, that he ruled this. This had been conquered. This was all part of an empire. It's kind of mind-blowing to me just how large it is, because if we take ourselves away from the reference point of what we know today and think about what life looked like back then, it's just such a large amount of space that he was the ruler over that. And in those days, King Ahasuerus sat on his royal throne, which was at the citadel in Susa. And in the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a banquet for his princes and attendants, the army officers of the Persia and Media, the nobles, and the princes of his provinces being in his presence. And he displayed the riches of his royal glory and the splendor of his great majesty for many days, 180 days, like 6 months. He had a party for 6 months. So I was like, okay, so I want to know why he had a party. Like, why did he have a party for 6 months? Because, I mean, can you imagine if, like, President Obama was saying, I'm going to have a party for 6 months? I mean, everybody would want to know why. There'd have to be a reason. You can't just have a party for 6 months. That's incredible. And how could your nation sustain a party for 6 months? Like, how could you do this? So I was doing some research, and it turns out that this was really the preface to a military campaign. And so he was preparing to go and attack Greece, but before he did that, he had to get the allegiance of all these 127 provinces and, amass all of his troops and all of this stuff. So he had spent 4 years putting together this plan of attack for when he went to war with the nation of Greece. And this was kind of like the culmination point before that. So over this period of 6 months, he had invited in all of these rulers, and all of the important people. And he was not doing this all at once. It wasn't like all of the important people from 127 provinces came to Susa at one time. They kind of came in waves. You wouldn't have every leader from the world come to one place all at the same time. That's kind of a bad idea. Would have been a bad idea today, would have been a bad idea back then. So they rotated. And so that's what took the full 6 months. And I wanted to know, how much did that cost his nation? I couldn't find, a dollar figure for that. But I can only imagine reading through some of the details about just how big the celebration was, or, he laid out the best of everything. And he didn't give a limit to anything. So this would have been some kind of mind-blowing party. I can only think of if the elite in Hollywood were throwing a party for 6 months, it might have looked like this. I don't know. But his thing was, let's plan this battle, let's make this strategy, let's make sure that I have everybody on board before we go. And they thought that it was a good idea to drink alcohol. They were drinking wine while they were doing these strategies. And that to me is a little bit fascinating, but that's very much how they did it then. So they had this party that lasted over 180 days, and then when that was over, he had another party. He had another party for 7 days for everybody in his kingdom, from the least to the greatest. So it was like he spent the first 180 days getting all the important people squared away, getting their allegiance, talking with them, figuring out how the strategy was going to look. And then he spent this last week with everybody from the least to the greatest. And part of me wants to know exactly how arrogant was this king. I mean, you have to figure he knew he was the ruler, he knew he was the top one. I'm sure that he had the ego to go with that. He would have had to be in that kind of position. I don't think it's just that he was this egotistical, tyrant or something, but because we see that he said from the least to the greatest. He didn't necessarily have to do that party at the end. We didn't necessarily have to know about that, but it made its way into the pages of Esther. I think that there's such importance in that, even of him identifying, okay, I'm going to allow people who wouldn't ordinarily ever be invited to a party like this to come. And I think it must have shown, even in greater sense to his strategy, that he was someone that incorporated his people. And I like to, I kind of like to try to get into the mind or think about these people that I read, and I want to understand them a little bit better because I know that they're real. They were really real. He lived and breathed just like you and I do. Granted, our lives were far different, but I think that it makes me have such a hunger for the word when I go ahead and give myself the ability to say, you know what, this was a real guy. And what was it really like there? And how does this work when I understand better the context and when I understand better all of these little intricate details? It opens my heart to really be able to understand the magnitude of what God does. Because he was this really, great king. He was someone that was well respected and, had all this allegiance. And think about what that would have looked like even as we read these next few verses. And And keep that in your mind when you're already starting to think about what happens with Esther. Like, I know I told you, forget that. Forget that this book is called Esther. Forget that you know it's coming, but you do. And so as you go into this, you have to think about how this looked, what the expectations were of anyone in the kingdom, and just how amazing it was that she chose to do what she did. And so it says, when these days were completed, the king gave a banquet lasting 7 days for all the people who were present in the citadel in Susa, from the greatest to the least, in the court of the garden of the king's palace. And there were hangings of fine white and violet and linen held by cords, and fine purple linen on silver rings and marble columns, and couches of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement, and marble and mother of pearl and precious stones. And drinks were served in gold vessels of various kinds, and the royal wine was plentiful according to the king's bounty. The drinking was done according to the law. There was no compulsion, for the king had given orders to the officials of his households that he should do according to the desires of his own person. And what that meant was there was typically this rule that whenever the king drank, you drank. But apparently he knew that he could drink a lot, and he told everybody, you can drink as much as you want. And when I think before I really studied that here, I just thought he was saying drink whatever you want. But he was saying, you don't have to drink what I drink. You can drink what you want to drink. And that wasn't how it was typically done. That's why it says that for us. He told them, you can do what you want to do. And so it makes me think that even though he was a king, and even though he would have done things a certain way, like, there was still this side of him that was thoughtful. There was still this other side of his humanity that we get these little glimpses of. And if you look at where he came from, his father was King Darius from Daniel and the Lion's Den, that King Darius. And his mother, her father was Cyrus the Great. So we read about him as well in the pages of the Word. And so he has this lineage of these really great kings. And Darius, he was always very amicable with the Babylonians. Like, he had great relationship with them. But here's one tidbit about Ahasuerus, who is also often referred to as Xerxes the First. Here's one tidbit about him. When he became king, he went into Babylon, and he took this statue that they had, this gold statue. And this statue was super important to their country. On the first day of the new year, the Babylonian king would go and, clasp the hands of this statue, and it was just this big proclamation and start of the new year. Well, King Ahasuerus took that statue and melted it down. And it wasn't because he loved the God that we love. It wasn't about that. He just did it. So, we see this mix of this really bold guy who doesn't just do what was done by his father or his grandfather, but he kind of makes his own choices. And there's always controversy when someone becomes the next king. When his father, Darius, died, King Ahasuerus, he was not the oldest of the kids. He was not the oldest of the boys, but he was the oldest from the mother who had, a great bloodline. The son who really was the oldest, his mom was just a commoner. And so he was not made to be king, but King Ahasuerus was made to be king. And so there's all of these little tidbits and pieces that I think make this story so fascinating to me, even from the beginning, to say, okay, so let's look where he came from. He ends up being used in this really amazing way. He allows the Lord to use him, but let's see where he came from. He's a little bit thoughtful in how he invites everybody in the kingdom, least to the greatest, and he says, you don't have to drink any more wine than you want to. It's all up to you. But he's so bold that he goes into Babylon and takes their statue and melts it down. And there are just other facets of him that I think it doesn't just show who he was, but it shows who Esther is and what God had spoken to her heart and the way she followed that out. And that's why I want to spend today just talking about the king. because I think it gives us a place to really understand her in a new way and understand what she allowed the Lord to do, and in the hopes then of us being inspired by whatever God wants us to do. Because coming into this chapter, everybody, kind of has that whole thing about Esther, for such a time as this. And it becomes this thing that we all grab onto, like, okay, God, so what does that mean for me? Like, what is my time? What is this time for me? Where do I say, okay, I'm here for such a time as this? What does that look like? And I think the beautiful thing about doing this early in the year is that we're all kind of coming off of those resolutions, whether you made any or not. I don't really think I made any this year, and that was pretty strategic on my part. Because what do I know about resolutions? I'm not necessarily the best at carrying them through. This year I'm trying to be a lot more intentional about journaling, and I'm journaling with a focus. I want to write down how I see God in the verses that I read every day. Like, okay, God, so whether I'm reading about Esther or whether I'm reading about the king, what are the attributes of you that I've seen in this passage? So I'm trying to really be mindful of the attributes of the Lord. And I'm also trying to be mindful of encouraging myself for, like, hey, good job, Marie. Here's what you did today that was good. Like 3 things every day. I'm much more skilled at being self-critical than I am of self-complimentary, and I'm only like that with me. I can be complimentary to other people, but I tend to be a little bit more harsh with myself. So I'm trying to take an inventory every day and say, okay, so where are the places that I did a good job today? And some of them are pretty simplistic, like I changed my kids' sheets. I don't know about you, but I hate changing sheets. When I was a kid, we changed our sheets like once a week. My mom had us on the schedule, and we all changed our own sheets. Okay, we have 4 kids at home. I don't know how much grumbling I would hear if I said, okay, every Monday night you're going to change your sheets or something. Like, I'll just do it, There are those things as a mom where I'm like, I know what will work and what won't work, and I'll just do it. And I don't really mind changing sheets. I just forget. Like, I've never gotten into a good rhythm with that, and I forget to do it a lot. Sometimes it's like I changed, the sheets, and we put on flannel sheets like later in the spring when it was still cold, and then it's almost getting to be summer, and I'm like, oh my gosh, you still have flannel sheets on your bed? I'm not saying that I leave them on for months, but like once it starts to warm up, I'm like, oh man. So I'm trying to do an inventory of myself to say, like, all right, Maria, you changed the sheets, that's great. And sometimes, of course, there are things that are a little bit more serious on that list, places where I was really being intentional about my pursuit of the Lord, or things that I'm choosing not to do because of him, and those kind of things. So, but I am just trying to say, like, hey, you did a good job. Don't we all need to compliment ourselves and encourage ourselves? And I think that's part of where this comes to for such a time as this. Like, if I'm not willing to allow the Lord to speak into my heart about who he sees me to be this year in 2015 and where he's taking me and what he's doing in our family, if I'm not willing to allow the Lord to pour it out on me to say, hey, Marie, you did a good job. Like, you didn't give up. Your son wanted you to come up like for the 8th time and tuck him in, and you didn't get frustrated and you didn't scold him. Woohoo! Because I'm not always good at like taking a deep breath and saying, yes, I want to see you again before you go to sleep. We all have those places of things that are difficult for us. But if I'm allowing the Lord to say, okay, Marie, like, just like you're willing to go back to him, 5 times. It's not usually that bad every night, but just like you're willing to do that, I'm willing to do that for you. Like, I'll never tell you no. Like, I'll never say, hey, I really don't want to hear from you one more time before you close your eyes. God doesn't say that to us. He welcomes us to come to him. And so part of what we're all embarking on in this season and in this beginning of 2015 is coming to this place where we say, okay, God, so what is it for such a time as this? I'm like this tree that's bare, and you see me. You see right to the core of who I am. You know the blood that's pumping through my veins. You know the passions that you've put inside my heart. You know me. You know me. And what do you have for me this year? In every aspect of my life, what do you have for me? What do you have for me in the hours when I'm a mom, from 6 o'clock in the morning until 8:30 when I drop Carson off at school, and then I come here. God, what do you have for me in those 2.5 hours? Because I want to connect with you in those. And God, if I'm not connecting with you, what am I going to have to give these ladies on Monday morning? And then if I'm not connecting with the Lord when I leave here Monday afternoon, what am I going to have to give my kids when they come home from school? And if I'm not connecting with the Lord while they come home from school, what am I going to have to give my husband when he gets home at night? And if I'm not connecting with the Lord when I'm there with my husband and my kids, what does it all look like when they go to bed? Like, that's what this means. That's what for such a time as this is. It's for such a time as this, those 2 hours first thing this morning before I came here. And for such a time as this time that we all have together right now. And for every moment afterwards. And we all have that. But it's so easy to just go through our days like, okay, it's Monday, and I have no idea what we're having for dinner tonight. And I don't really know who has a test tomorrow, but I think one of them does. And am I supposed to be making snack for something? It's all of those kind of questions. And that is not my for such a time as this. Like, those are those things that I do because I'm a mom or whatever. But I want to be intentional about engaging the Lord and saying, for such a time as this is so much more than all those little things that I have to do today. And yet sometimes I give focus, the greatest amount of my time or my stress or my anxiety to those things. When I'm like, yeah, and I have no idea what we're eating. We're doing this autoimmune protocol diet. Like, there's no flour, there's no pizza, there's no sandwiches, there's no tomato soup, there's no spaghetti. Like, there's nothing. It's vegetables, it's meat, and it's a little bit of fruit. And I can't throw that together at 5 p.m., But I can say, okay, God, so you're creative, and this didn't throw you, and I know you're going to show me what to make that not only nourishes my family, but that they would like to eat. Probably not all of them at the same time, let's be honest. But he shows us. And that's the thing that I love about who God is, that he comes right into these places where we are, and he shows us how to do that stuff that isn't even the big deal for our day. Like, it's so easy for me to make the big deal that I have no idea what I'm going to make for dinner. Like, how many times a day do I think that or say that? But God comes into that place, and he shows me what to do. And it's really not that bad. We can do it, He does that for each one of us. He comes into all those places where we go when we leave this. And he says, I'm going to walk this out with you because this really isn't the crux of what I've got for you today. You think this is a big challenge. It's probably not the biggest challenge you're going to face today, unfortunately. Or you being so wrapped up in these small challenges is going to steal you away from feeling the joy that I have for you. And the bigness of my relationship with you and who I am right there with you. I know you guys all remember, if you were here for our Nehemiah study, I talked about how God speaks to me in feathers sometimes. Like, he just reminds me of his presence. And I posted it on my Facebook, I think in the interim of when Nehemiah ended and this study started. I had been asking the Lord for a long time in my life that I wanted to see an eagle. Like, I didn't want to see an eagle at the zoo, That is not it to me. Like, I don't want to go somewhere where I know there's going to be an eagle and see one. That does not count. It's like when you say to your husband, does this look okay? You haven't told me in a while that I looked nice. And then he's like, oh, you look so pretty. You're like, yeah, that didn't count. You have to wait until I'm not expecting it. Like, that's how I feel about seeing an eagle. I just want to see one when I'm not in a place where I should see one. So, all throughout the fall, I was seeing people posting on Facebook around Lancaster County. There were certain places where people were really seeing eagles and whatever. And I just have been saying to the Lord, like, God, I really want to see an eagle. Like, I've been asking you this for probably a decade. Like, it's been so long I can't even remember. And I look at the birds all the time in the sky, and we have a lot of red-tailed hawks. I have yet to see an eagle. So I had a dream this one night. And in the dream, I knew that I was going to see an eagle. I was in the place where I needed to be to see an eagle. I'm driving around, and I'm in the car. Dan was driving, and I'm looking out every window. Like, I had the sunroof open. I'm looking out the back windows. I'm just like, I know there's going to be an eagle here. I know that I'm in the right place to see an eagle. But I didn't see one in the dream. But I woke up with such a passion in my heart for the places that I've been pressing into the Lord and for the things that I've been asking him to do. And even to see an eagle, that it wasn't just about that. It was about so much more. But that he was saying to me, you know what? You're in the right place. Like, you're exactly where you're supposed to be. And don't stop believing that you're going to see this. That you're going to see what you've been asking me for your family. That you're going to see what you've been asking for yourself. That you're going to see an eagle. So that morning, Bryce was getting ready to head out the door, and I said to him, do you have gym today? And he was like, no, I don't have gym. Well, their school runs like on a 5-day cycle or a 6-day cycle. I don't know, and I can't keep track of it, and they're in middle school or high school. I'm like, yeah, you figure it out, But his gym bag was sitting by the door, so I thought he probably has gym. No, I don't have gym. Are you sure you don't have gym? I am sure. So he goes to school. And I take Abigail and Carson to school, and I get home, and he texts me from his iPad, and he's like, hey, Mom, I have gym today. I need you to bring me my gym clothes. I'm like, okay, dude, I'll bring them. What time? He's like, I'm not really sure. And he thought he had it at like 10, and then he texted me back. He was like at 9 something, and then he texted me back, I have gym in 5 minutes. I need my gym clothes right now. I'm like, okay. It was like 8:40. I mean, the time frame had been getting shorter in like 2 minutes. I'm like, I will be right there. It might take me more than 5 minutes, but I'll be right there. So I'm driving over to his school, and of course, I get stuck in like all the parents who were dropping off at elementary. Well, it's taking me way more than 5 minutes. So I stop. I go in. I'm like, hey, I'm Bryce's mom. He forgot his gym clothes. Can you please call him? He's in gym right now. I don't want him to get a 0 for the day. Like, I didn't want to take the time to actually get there and then know that he's in gym and they're probably not calling him and find out later that he never got the gym clothes. So I was like, I'm not leaving until I hear them call him, so they call him. So I leave, get stuck in the traffic of the parents dropping off their kids on the way out. And I'm like, this is taking so long. Wow, this is taking a lot longer than I thought. But I wasn't annoyed about it. Like, I was just kind of laughing. It was one of those like glorious mom moments where I wasn't annoyed. I was just thinking this was kind of funny. And I pull into our neighborhood on the way back, and I see this bird in the sky, and I look up and I'm like, oh my gosh, it has a white head. Oh my goodness, that's an eagle. So I, it's just our neighborhood. I like stop my car and I get my phone out and I'm taking all these pictures, and then I pull over and I'm taking pictures again. I'm like, oh my goodness, Lord. Like, okay, so I just had that dream the night before. You showed me the eagle today, but if Bryce hadn't forgotten his gym clothes, I don't sit in my house looking out the window, And just the way that God uses what he tells us and the way that he uses every circumstance in our lives to accomplish his will. Like, I said to Bryce when he got home, like, I can't believe you forgot your gym clothes. That was so awesome. I saw an eagle, which is probably not what he thought I would say, But God does that. He uses like the seemingly insignificant little parts of our day to show us who he is. And that's what I love about the word. And I think that we all saw that through the pages of Nehemiah. Like, when we got into those lists of people, there was stuff in there. There were these little nuggets of truth and life and revelation, even in those names. I'm not usually one that's like, yes, a list of names. I can't wait to read it, But if we go into it saying, okay, God, I know that even in this list of names, you've got something to show me. He begins to connect the dots about lots of other things and show us just the richness and the depth of the scriptures. And that's what I love about, what he does when we just read something and we're like, okay, God, so open up our minds to this. Show us this. Like, help me to ask you the right questions that get me to the answers where you want me to go. When I was a little girl, I used to love reading these choose your own adventure books. Loved those because it was practically impossible to ever read the same story twice. Like, you could read that book 5 times and you'd always get a different ending. Even times when I was like, all right, I really liked that one ending. I'm going to make the same choices to get back there. It was like impossible. But our lives are like that. And we can read the same passage of scripture over and over and over and continue to see new things through the Lord. And I love that he does that even in what looks like the introduction, that doesn't look like the main part of the story. And it says, Queen Vashti also gave a banquet for the women in the palace which belonged to King Ahasuerus. she had her own party going on, like a party for the ladies. She had her own party. And I was doing a little bit of research about her, and there's a lot to say about her. Like, I guess I kind of thought, I don't know, I kind of feel bad for her because of what happened. But I think that there's so much more about her. I mean, she gets like a couple sentences, but she was a pretty tough woman. She was bold, and I don't think she was what I would have expected the queen to be. And maybe not all queens were like this, but she was a very strong woman. And so he calls her. And there's a lot of differing opinions about this section coming up here. If you go online and read more about it, it says, on the seventh day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, and he commanded the 7 eunuchs, and I'm not going to read their names, who served in the presence of King Ahasuerus, to bring Queen Vashti before the king with her royal crown, in order to display her beauty to the people and to the princes, because she was beautiful. But Queen Vashti refused to come to the king's command delivered by the eunuchs. And the king became very angry, and his wrath burned within him. She said no. She said, no, I'm not doing it. And I think about my relationship with my husband, and if he asked me to do something, and I said, no, I'm not doing it, like, okay, it's what it is. And there's nothing that I can equate to this scenario, but we have the ability to choose. That's what our lives are like. We don't live in a society that represses women or looks on them the way they were looked on here. She was not allowed to tell him no. And think about it in the context of he had just been preparing for 4 years to go to battle. He has this huge party for 6 months where he's meeting with all of these military advisors. And it said that the force that he went to Greece with was somewhere between 1 and 2 million troops. That is a huge amount. He had gotten an allegiance from all of these 127 provinces, and he'd been working on his strategy and his master plan for how he was going to take over Greece. And he asks his wife to come and show everybody how beautiful she is, and she says no. And how does that make him look? You can't be a king that's going into battle, and your queen tells you no. And so the wise men, the advisors that he had around him, they were like, wow, what are you going to do about this? Because it all starts here. And whatever you allow to go on in the palace is going to go through everybody else's homes. Because remember, it wasn't just that she was in her quarters and he asked for her and she said no. She was having her own party. I don't know how many women she had with her, but let's just imagine that she said, similarly to what the king said, from the least to the greatest. Everybody in the kingdom. He had all the guys. Let's assume she had a fairly large amount of women. Women from Susa, from the least to the greatest. That meant every woman in that town knew what happened. They all knew that he called for her and she said no. And so the advisors to the king were like, you have to do something about this, because if you allow her to tell you no, every woman in this kingdom is going to feel like she has the liberty to tell her husband no. Well, how would that make him look going out to battle? Who would respect him? Oh, look, here's the king who can't keep his wife in order. Nobody would take him seriously. And I can only imagine, how did that affect him? Like, if I can think of this, and yes, it kind of feels a little bit humorous to me. How did that feel to him? And then I think about, okay, so what are all the places where I over-exaggerate things in my mind and I come up with this, like, huge problem out of this little tiny thing? Well, what if he magnified how that was going to look for him in his mind? Well, I mean, his heart was merry with wine. We know he's been drinking for like 6 months and a week, So he might not be thinking things through quite as logically as we would think about them right now. And his anger and his wrath burned within him. He was filled with emotion. And he was emotional about this. Plus, I mean, even on a personal level, if you set all that aside, just the whole strategy, military, this is going to affect every household in the kingdom kind of thing, just think about it on a personal level. If he didn't have the respect of the queen, if he didn't have the respect of his wife, how would that make him feel about himself? And I know that, their marriage relationships were so different than ours, and he had multiple wives and all these concubines or whatever. That's how it went when you were a king. But I still think he had to feel that. And if you knew that your spouse or your best friend, someone that was super close to you, if you asked them to do something for you and they said no, they didn't respect you enough to honor your wishes, and it made you look like a fool in front of everybody, how does that make you feel? And so they're like, you have to do something about this. And there wasn't any one place that said, yes, she was definitely executed, but it was assumed that she was most likely executed. And you would have had to thought, didn't she know that was going to happen? And there wasn't anything she could do about it. There wasn't any way for her to undo this thing that had happened. She just bore the consequences for her own choices. And she bore them because of the consequence they would have had across the kingdom. So it wasn't even just about her choice. It was about what her choice would have then given license to for everybody else. And so she received a punishment based on that. And that's the way it worked there. That's how it went in the kingdom. And so let's say you didn't know, you didn't know any more of the story, you've never read past chapter 1, you forgot what the title of this book was called, just put that out of your mind. What would you think happens next? What do you think happens next in this story? What do you think this story becomes? If it was up to us to choose, in this choose your own adventure, what do you think this would be about? What do you think this book would be about? What do you think the rest of the pages would be? If I had to set aside everything I already know and say, based on logic and reasoning, what would I think happens? Oh yeah, I think he'd get a new queen. End of story. That would be it. I would never have suspected that it would go so much further than that. But I want you to think about your lives in the same context to that. Forget what you think you know about your story. Forget what you think you know about the next few months of your life. Forget what you think you know about 2015. And be willing to look at your life based on, here's where I'm at right now, and these are the challenges I'm facing right now, or this is what God's put on my heart right now, and say, he's going to do something really amazing that I can't even comprehend. Because all the stuff that happened in chapter 1, it was just this thing between two people. It was this thing that happened between the king and the queen. But it became the avenue by which God did amazing things. And it's not really a glamorous way to start the story. It's not like criteria for the next great Disney fairy tale, But that's what I love about who God is, that he does these things that we couldn't comprehend, and that he can transform us from this place where we are to this amazing place that he's planned to take us in these circumstances that look like junk. If we look at the path of our lives, if I look at the path of my life and I say, okay, so here's where God's taken me in the last 8 years, and the jumping off point was not good. But he's done this amazing thing with it. That's who God is. And he doesn't just do that once in our lives, or 1 out of 10 people, or, some kind of crazy ratio like that. He does it for all of us. And while, the book of Esther and Esther's story is so powerful and it's so remarkable and we can be so inspired by it, let's not forget that we have the capacity to be that too. And it doesn't mean that we have to save a nation or, stop this major catastrophe from happening. But when we allow ourselves to truly say, whatever you've got, God, for such a time as this, right now. Whatever you want me to do, Lord, right now. We have the ability through him to have this amazing story too. And to have it not just transform our own lives, but to transform the lives of everyone else we know. So that's why I would say today, forget everything you think you know about your story. Forget where you think it's all going, the places of frustration in your life or challenge or difficulty, and you kind of think you can see what God's going to do with that or know maybe where he's going to take you or what this is all going to look like. Forget it. Forget it. Because if he can take a start of a story like this and turn it around to end up freeing the Jews, what does he have planned that's so much bigger than you? And what does he have planned that's so much bigger than whatever junk you're walking through? Or whatever you see someone else walking through, whatever that area of struggle is in your life, he's got a big plan for it. And we're all the same. We all experience places of pain and brokenness, and it's really easy to come into Bible study or go to church or meet up with your girlfriends and look like those trees that have all the beautiful leaves on them, and everything's great, and you've got it all together, and it's all fine. But we're all like the trees we see outside right now. We all look like that. And when we are willing to say, here's who I am, here's what I'm dealing with, here's my struggle, here's what's going on, it gives God the ability to knit our hearts together and to be that source of encouragement for one another and to be able to say, no, it's not perfect all the time. Are you kidding me? It's so not perfect all the time. But I know that God's doing something really amazing with it. And one of the things that I love that it says about Esther is that she knew the power of prayer and fasting. She knew what it took before the Lord. And so as we transition from chapter 1 then into chapter 2 this week, I want to be asking you to take that up with God. Where are the places of your relationship that you need to walk out more seriously with him? And what are the avenues of fellowship with the Father that he wants to take you to a deeper level on? And maybe it's just spending more time in worship, maybe it is fasting. Maybe it is spending more time in prayer. And we talked about fasting a little bit when we went through Nehemiah. And I love fasting. It's a discipline, and I don't always like that. I love coffee. I had 4 cups of coffee yesterday morning by 11 o'clock. They were all caffeinated, and I didn't feel anything. And to me, it's not necessarily about the caffeine. I just like it. I like hot coffee. And I don't put sugar in it, but I like plain cream, half and half. Me and coffee, half and half. We're really close. And I like chocolate a lot. Chocolate and coffee. We spend a lot of time together. But there are these times when I feel like the Lord calls me to fast. And sometimes I'm not really sure why he's doing it. I'll feel him say, okay, Marie, I want you to give up certain things for a while. I want you to spend extra time just focused on me. I want you to allow me to be your comfort, because I'll be honest, 2 o'clock rolls around and I'm tired. And I'm I have to do another hour in the car picking everybody up and all that stuff. And I'm tired. I'm let's have some coffee. I was at an appointment last week and the doctor was saying hey, did you know broccoli has a lot of protein? If you're tired, have some broccoli. I was 2 o'clock, I'll have to have some broccoli instead of the coffee. Never, That is just not happening. But there are these places where God says, hey, I want you to allow me to do something different. I want you to press into me a little bit harder. I want you to give up some of the conveniences that you lean so heavily on so that you can lean a little bit more heavily on me. And I'm I can't wait. Seriously, I can't wait, because I know that he does something. And whether he gives me, a focus to pray about when I'm fasting, when I'm spending that time with him, or whether he's just saying, Marie, I want you to allow me to unfold this as it goes. like he does good things, and I love it. And yeah, it's not always easy. If I'm refraining from something and my kids are having it, I'm like, oh, and there's that little crumb left on their plate, Like, all right, I won't do it. It takes a discipline, it takes a sacrifice on ourselves to do that, but it opens up to us a depth of relationship with the Lord that we just wouldn't have seen otherwise. And so I love it. And so I just want to ask you to be praying about that this week, just asking the Lord, is there a place that you want to talk to me about, anything that you want me to be in a position to either give up or to devote more time to? Because Esther was a girl who knew about prayer and fasting. She knew about the disciplines of the Lord, and I don't think she could have gone where she went and did what she did had she not been sold out to Jesus. Had she not put her emphasis on her relationship with God and hearing what he said and following him out wholeheartedly, who would have had the courage to walk in front of the king knowing what happened to Vashti? And it says, then the king said to his wise men who understood the times, for it was the custom of the king to speak before all who knew law and justice and were close to him. And the 7 princes of Mercia and Media who had access to the king's presence and sat in the place where the king sits. According to the law, what is to be done with Queen Vashti because she did not obey the command of King Ahasuerus delivered by the eunuchs? In the presence of the king and the princes, Memucan said, Queen Vashti has wronged not only the king, but also all the princes and all the peoples who are in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus. For the queen's conduct will become known to all the women, causing them to look with contempt on their husbands by saying, King Ahasuerus commanded Queen Vashti to be brought before his presence, but she did not come. This day the ladies of Persia and Media who have heard of the queen's conduct will speak in the same way to all the king's princes, and there will be plenty of contempt and anger. If it pleases the king, let a royal edict be issued by him, and let it be written in the laws of Persia and Media so that it cannot be repealed, that Vashti may no longer come into the presence of King Ahasuerus. And let the king give her royal position to another who is more worthy than she. When the king's edict, which he will make, is heard throughout all his kingdom, great as it is, then all the women who will give honor to their husbands, great and small. And this word pleased the king and the princes, and the king did as Memucan proposed. And so the king sent letters, and so he sent letters to all the king's provinces, to each province according to its script, and to every people according to their language, that every man should be master in his own house, and the one who speaks in the language of his own people. So he sent out this thing. It wasn't just about replacing her, getting rid of Vashti. It wasn't just about getting rid of her. It was also then about correcting whatever already was heard about this. Women make things get around, We're really good at passing on information. And there were all these women that were with Vashti who knew what happened. So it wasn't just about, okay, let's get rid of Vashti, but let's make a proclamation, let's send this out. And he sent it out in every language, to every province, to every household, that the man was in charge. And I think it's interesting that it says the women will give honor to their husbands, great and small. When this thing was read, it wasn't just oh, Vashti didn't come and she's gone, forget Vashti. The language in there must have also upheld the statute of men having preeminence in the home, because this line that we read here says, then all the women will give honor to their husbands, great and small. So there was probably something that said, when he was reading this out loud, you have to give honor to your husband, whatever, because they did. And so the honor that King Ahasuerus did not get, he made sure everybody else got through his kingdom. He was not having what happened, to them, what had happened to him. He was a strong man. He knew what he could do. He knew the law, and he talked about the law with the people who advised him. I don't know if any of you have ever seen that movie One Night with the King. Have you guys seen that? So I kind of have this balance between that and the VeggieTale version of Esther. Like, this is what plays out in my head while I'm reading this, because in VeggieTales, all this stuff happens in like 25 minutes? The span of Esther happened over a period of about 20 years. And she didn't come on the scene until probably a few years after. I like to get a really factual, hard timeline for all this kind of stuff. But so he had been preparing for battle 4 years, amassing all of his troops and his strategy, had this big party with all these guys, planned out what they were going to do, had 1 million to 2 million troops to go, and 10,000 of those were elite warriors from across his kingdom. They were going to Greece. It's likely that the whole thing with Esther happened while he was gone, like going through the kingdom and picking the girl and then all of the things that she had to go through, and we'll get into those in following weeks. But it wasn't like this happened tomorrow. I read through this and it's like, okay, so this all happened on Sunday and they got Esther on Monday and she was queen by Tuesday. It's not like that. It's not the 20-minute VeggieTale version of biblical history. This stuff happened over a period of years. Even the time it would have taken to send all those letters out over the provinces, that would have taken some time. And so he goes out, to attack Greece, and he's completely unsuccessful. And I think one of the things that really point to his character and who he was is that, yeah, he listened to people to some degree, but I think what I've seen about this king was that he really only listened to people who were saying what he wanted to hear. And I think that that's true of a lot of leaders in our world. They are more apt to listen to people who are saying things they want to hear than the people who are maybe saying something against them. I found this really interesting website last week when I was studying just a little bit more depth on some of the particulars of the kingdom and who Ahasuerus was. And so this comes from a website, and it says, with relative peace established in his kingdom, he again turned his attention to Greece and conquest. That's what they did. They didn't stay around at home too long. They found a new nation that they wanted to take over, and so they went out and went for it. He spent 4 years amassing enough supplies and weaponry for the campaign and also conscripting as many men as he could from various regions to ensue his victory. Herodotus tells the story of a descendant of another king whose 5 sons were among those conscripted. And Pythias hosted the king and his army lavishly at Sardis in the winter of 481 to 480 BC. And he offered to give Xerxes a considerable sum of money for the campaign, but Xerxes refused his offer and instead rewarded Pythias for his generosity by adding greatly to his treasury. But then it says, prior to Xerxes' departure for the Hellespont, which was like this big river there, a bad omen in the form of an eclipse appeared in the sky. But Xerxes, assured by his diviners that it meant nothing, proceeded with his plans. Pythias, however, recognized the omen as a warning of impending doom, and emboldened by Xerxes' generosity and kindness, he asked if his eldest son could be released from the army so that he would have at least one son to care for him in his old age and to carry on as an heir. This guy had, he had felt this warning, like this battle that you're going into, this is not going to go well. He was a king too. His 5 sons were taken into the army. It wasn't just like, hey, do you want to be in the army? It wasn't that kind of thing. It was like, you're going to be in the army. We need this many people. You're going to be in the army. So he wanted his one son, his oldest son, to not have to go in. And it said, Xerxes became enraged at this request, as it meant that Pythias doubted his chances of success. He had the eldest son removed from the ranks, cut him in half, placed the 2 sections of the corpse on either side of the road, and marched his troops away between them. Like, that's who this king was. He knew what he could do. And he could do that. And so that makes me think, knowing all of these things now that we now know about King Ahasuerus, it makes me think about Esther in a completely different way. Like, that girl was crazy, like in a really good way. You know, she had to be so filled with the courage and the boldness of the Lord that she could go and pursue what God asked her to do, even though all these people had fallen before her. Everybody would have known about what happened with that guy that got cut in half. I mean, he marched the troops through both halves of him. Like, everybody in the kingdom would have known about that. They all knew that he got rid of Vashti. Like, you don't cross this king. You don't step into a place where you don't have authority, and you don't tell him something contrary to what he wants to hear. But he's coming from this place of, okay, chapter 1, he doesn't have a queen anymore. He might have had other wives and other concubines, but he doesn't have his queen. He lost her allegiance. He doesn't have her. The story starts in a really dark kind of place. It starts with all this turmoil and all this conflict. But God does something truly amazing through it. Truly amazing. And I don't know about you, but for me, that makes me look at my life differently. And that's why I came to this place of feeling the Lord say, forget everything you know. Because who would think that a story about how the Jews were saved would start like this? Forget everything you know about this. And I know last time when we were going through Nehemiah, we had like this Nehemiah song of the week, you know, just a song of a time of reflection and just allowing the Lord to speak to your heart. And we're going to do that again this time. And so I have a song to play for you guys this morning. And I want you, while this song plays, it's about 5 minutes, to just come before the Lord in this quiet place and say, okay, God, so I can kind of look back across the landscape of my life and see these places of difficulty, these places of turmoil, these places where things didn't work out the way I thought, places that were greatly challenging. And I don't want to view my future based on that stuff. But I want to view my future based on saying, okay, God, whatever you want to do, like for such a time as this, you are capable of so much more than I could ever ask, think, or imagine. And let him inspire you about the place where you are right now and what he has for your life. You know, he's a super creative God. And I don't think he ever does the same thing twice. He doesn't have to. Like, he can think of new ways. And he sees our heart, and he loves us, and he wants us to know that we're loved. I haven't seen any feathers recently, but yesterday I was taking a winter walk with Dan. He's been asking me for days, like, go on a winter walk with me. I'm like, are you kidding? It's like 12 degrees outside. Why would I go outside with you? Well, I think maybe 2 weeks ago I bought a pair of boots. This is the first time I bought boots since I was a teenager. I usually like shovel snow in my sneakers. I just don't like snow, and I figure if I don't have boots, I don't have to go outside in it. But Dan and I were out for a date, and we stopped by Marshall's because I think they have the best shoes. And he was like, hey, aren't those boots cute? Why don't you get a pair of boots? Not these boots. Abigail's wearing my boots today. And I said, okay, sure, why not? So we went for this winter walk yesterday, and I'm like, don't take any pictures of me. He likes to take pictures. He's like, I need a picture to prove that you were here. I was like, I took a picture on my own phone, thank you. Proof enough for me. But so we're walking along this really pretty path, and I saw a feather. Would you believe it? And, you know, most of the time the feathers that I find are just pretty, like, nondescript. It's just, like, from some bird. It's white. It's brown. You know, it's a feather. Whatever. But this was a blue jay feather. And I knew it was a blue jay feather. It was blue. So I picked up that feather and put it in my pocket. And I said to him, you know, I should, like, keep a Ziploc bag or something. Because I don't want to be, like, putting my hand in and out of my pocket and lose this feather. And so I got home, and last night I just felt the Lord saying to me, ask me about that blue jay. I'm like, okay, so tell me about the blue jay, God. Tell me about that blue jay. And I felt him saying, like, I want you to think about the blue jay, and I want you to allow me to open up to you how you're like that blue jay. Or things that I've put inside of you that are like the blue jay. And things that I want you to know about yourself that are like that blue jay too. And one of the things that I always say to the Lord is, God, I want to live a really long time. I want to be really old when I die. I want to have lived like this, where it says in the Bible, like they died at whatever, like a, ripe old age and they were happy or whatever. Like I want to live till I'm really, really old. And it said that that blue jays sometimes live till they're 17 in the wild and 26 in captivity, and a normal bird lives about 7 years. I'm like, hey, I like that, God. That was one of the first things that he really spoke that touched my heart in a profound way, because it's not like we get any guarantees, and I've experienced a lot of people dying in my life, and I want to live till I'm really old. So that just so hit me, like total love from the Lord. And then I went on to read about the blue jay, and it said that they chase predatory birds, and they scream if a predator is in the area so that the smaller birds can go and hide. And I thought, like, yeah, God, I want to be like that. Like, I want to see the predators, and I want to call them out, and I want to protect the people that are in my life. Like, I'm like that. And it said that it sounds an alarm. And sometimes it sounds an alarm by sounding like a hawk. And then if a hawk answers back, then it knows that there is one. Like, it's really creative in how it figures out if there are predators around. And it's known to be aggressive if humans come near their nests. Like, a blue jay is like this big. It is not big at all. And yet, if I walked near its nest, it would be like all over me. It's not afraid of big problems. Like, it flies to the big problems. It goes right to it, and it's like, you're not getting my nest. You're not messing with this. Get out of here, and I am going to drive you away. Okay, so if a blue jay can get rid of a human, like, what can we do, Like, when we're faced with problems, we can just fly right into them and say, yeah, like, this is so not going to mess with me. And owls, if there is an owl that's roosting near its nest, it will just continue to assault the owl until it moves. I mean, it did say that they're really noisy and then they talk a lot and chatter and stuff like that, but I'm not taking that on. But I share that with you because in the time that you're listening to this song, I want you to be asking the Lord what he has for you. What he has for you in this place that you're at right now. And I want you to continue to ask him that as you leave today. Like, God, what do you have for me in this season? What is my for such a time as this? And I'm sure that some of us know a glimpse of that. I know that I shared with you guys from the Nehemiah group that our family's in the process of adopting, and we're like so close to having our paperwork ready to send off to South Africa, and just waiting on a couple more things. And so there are bits and pieces of my life that I can see for such a time as this. Like, I see that. But there are a lot of things that I don't. There are a lot of things that are stirring in my heart that I'm still asking the Lord about, and places that I just need him to speak to me about, even like how he sees me like a blue jay. And just what an amazing encouragement that was for me last night. That was huge. And so I'll have the blue jay feather, and I'll date, what day that was, and be able to keep that as a reminder to myself of here's where God spoke to me, and here's what he said to my heart, and this is the way that it was so powerful to me. And so I want you guys to be thinking about those things while you're listening to the song, and just allowing to the Lord to speak past the places of brokenness that you've known and into what he has for you in this season that's coming. Okay, so I just want to pray for you before we dismiss, and then we're going to go into our small groups, and I'll have the small group leaders stand up and just give you guys instructions as you head out. So God, I just thank you for your presence with us this morning, Lord. God, I thank you that you are doing new things, Lord. And God, I ask that for each one of us in the places where we don't see the newness that you speak of or the beauty inside of us that you see, God, would you allow that new thing to spring up? Would you allow us to embrace the fact that you truly are doing something new? Not just for us or in us, but so that you can shine through us to others. And God, as we begin to study this book together, and as we move into unfolding these first few verses and hearing of Esther. God, would you show us the questions to ask of you to get the answers that you know we need? And God, I ask that our hearts and our minds would be filled with your life, and that we would just be drawn into continually deeper places with you, knowing that your word frees us, and that it releases us, and that it teaches us. God, your word brings life. So I thank you for this time that we've had together, and I ask that you would just continue to speak to us as we go from here today. Amen.